Linton group or something else.
I guess we should say that we structured this forum a little bit different. So we said we were not going to sit here and talk to you guys the whole time. We need to hear your voices. So here's where we want to hear from you. Education, is that a real thought? What do people want?
I would like to hear, invite some people from the Black community to come here and talk about what they're doing to combat, deal with work toward anti-racism.
Catherine, can you repeat the questions for us?
Is this working? Can folks hear this?
Mm-hmm.
The comment was that it would be great to hear more from people from the Black community who are already working on anti-racist activities, to hear directly from people about what they are doing and in that. Is that accurate? And how we can join with them, how we can work with them on that.
So I think one thing that we do want to clarify that we probably haven't yet is that our efforts of the task force we're trying not to make this about Black and white solely and only. We're trying to make sure that we're inclusive for everyone. So we want to hear from our brothers and sisters in the Asian community and the Latin community and across the board. But so it seems like there is a theme of like having people come here to hear their voices as well. Okay.
Well, I expect many of you know about this. I only recently became aware of Trabian Shorters and his work in asset framing and the organization he's founded. And as I listened, I just resonated, because asset framing is, let us not fall into the trap of identifying people in terms of their needs or the discrimination. Let's look at the assets, and I just think he's got such a powerful framing that we could all learn from, because we're all stumbling. It's all for all those communities, the disability community, LGBT community, Black community, Asian, Hispanic, whatever it may be. So I think we do have to have the broader lens. I appreciate that you put that framing around it.
Well, and I wonder, sorry, Patty, does that speak a little bit towards the undesign the red line, the asset framing? We need to restate that? Sorry.
Yeah.
You got to put that mic right in your
Okay.
mouth.
So can
right
we,
in your mouth.
Yeah, repeat what you. Yeah, thank you.
Do you want to?
You've got to put it really
speak
close.
again?
I'm sorry, I just referenced Trabian asset framing, which some of you may be associated with. He's a quite remarkable social philosopher and has created a powerful framing that puts it in terms of the assets of the groups with whom we interact rather than the deficits. And I just, as I listen to him, Krista Tippett, who has the podcast and the NPR program On Being, interviewed him this morning, and it's just such a powerful way of shifting our thinking into the gear I think we want it to be in love and fellowship.
Yeah, so the one thing we can do, just immediately, those were two references, so we can, I don't know if we have a space on the anti-racism page, but let's get those links available, that podcast, so that people can have access to it as an easy starting point. But Patty, the connection I was going to make was in terms of asset framing and undesigning the red line and some of that work and what is available, there's a connection there, I think, anyway.
Well, I think one connection is The Sum of Us, which is another book. It does look at how our policies or economics are set up as a zero-sum game, and that if there was a different orientation towards that, and we viewed things through that lens, knowing that historic lens we used, we would have a different framework. So I think it's related, but this sounds like a more specific way of doing it, is one thing. And Undesign the Red Line is, I would say that's more of a general education. It is a program at the Howard County Library up in Columbia, and it is a very graphic set of panels that tells the story of redlining. Redlining in the United States, the impact it had on people buying homes, accumulating wealth. It then looks at the local community. Another panel shows the general history of the United States and the impact of all those activities. And then the final panel is one of knowing this, seeing the impact it's had on all of us. How do we want to move forward?
I know you asked about education, and I know that Stirring the Waters and other groups, I know that Stirring the Waters and other groups are doing very active work in that, but also I wanted to encourage some of the other ministry groups to be able to talk about this. With the Fathers group that we have, we kind of created a separate voluntary activity where we read a lot of books about parenting and anti-racism, and we had smaller group discussions around those readings. And because we already had an established relationship among the members of these smaller ministry groups, I think it created an easier environment for us to talk about these topics. So not only were we educating ourselves through the readings, but we were also talking about it and kind of thinking about ways to put it into action. So while it's great that we have a group that may be dedicated to anti-racism, being able to inject that also into other ministry groups, I think would also create really active opportunities. So yeah, that's just a suggestion about education.
Yeah, we didn't plant that question, but since you said that, why not take low-hanging fruit? So one of the things that we're working on is that we've set up subcommittees that we're working on, and one of them is targeting at ministries. Because part of what the vestry asked us to do is to look at how this becomes part of you guys can hear me? Part of St. Columba's fabric. It goes through everything. So one thing that we're looking at is the various ministries, and we're trying to figure out right now how we support them. There's two levels of the work, right? One, in auditing who's in your ministry. Is it open to everybody? Are we always talking to the same people and doing things the same way? That's an audit of who we show up with in that ministry, right? Are we building relationships? Separate and apart from that, there's the work of how do we make sure that being anti-racism and that education and that thought is just part of also what the ministry does, so that we can shift from serve to relationship building and othering and throughout our ministry. So that is one thing we're actively working on right now, and we planned, you were in our highlighted ministry group, to have a conversation with. So that's the next one of the things that we're doing right now as subgroup. But I think that's right, and it's good to hear that we might be on the right track there.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Probably most of you know that I have participated in educational programs through Stirring the Waters, and a lot of that was done online. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that as a larger parish group. And I've looked at our YouTubes, how many views we've had. There are fewer than 300. Fewer than 300 views on both of those sessions. And I know that some of those views are by people outside of St. Columba's. And so I'm following up on, I think, what Keisha and Lane have been saying, and Lauren, that we need to engage the parish much more broadly. There were only a little over 200 people who responded to the survey, and we have roughly, 900 pledging members? And 600 pledging members, okay.
Like 900.
All right, we'd like 900. We'll take 600, though. So that's a third of the parish even bothered to respond to the survey. So how can we really engage people much more broadly than those of us who care about this, who show up, who talk about it, think about it, read about it? We just have to get people much more engaged through any way that people can think of.
So that's the second plan. So the second group, we do have a second working group that's working specifically on communication and how we do just that. Like, how do we engage, across the board? We're happy about 200, but you're right. There should be hopefully a broader response to that.
I thought there was a wonderful presentation a few weeks ago on St. Columba's history. And again, it was just a group this size, I think, that saw it. Maybe it's available on YouTube. But that's another great educational, such an important starting point. And I think it speaks to a couple of the negative responses from the survey as well, of like, hey, we're doing great. We've always been great. So I don't know if there's a way to promote that more vigorously and intentional. I mean, it is intentional. I don't mean to say that at all, but just a way to promote it more as something that people should be watching and educating themselves on.
Joyce, do you still have a question? Up here. Okay.
Thanks. So first, I do think we should feel really good about so much of the education that's been going on between everything Stirring the Waters has done, Sacred Ground, the fantastic presentations we were just referring to about our history. The question I have is, have we done any segmentation of the congregation about sort of where they are on this issue and thought about how we can segment offerings to meet people where they are? Because I sense that there are some people that are very new in having these kinds of conversations and perhaps maybe interested but reticent and need kind of the introduction to beginning to think about these issues. And then there are some people that are kind of ready for like the 301 class. They've kind of done all the basics and they're ready to move on to like, what do we do? And thinking about, undesigning the red line and all of that some of us went to go see. So that's, I guess, my question on education is there a way to segment? And I love Chip's point about the fathers group. That's a great, way to engage folks where they are maybe on parenting issues. So anyway, that's just a thought I had as listening to all of this. I think we're doing a lot of great things, but maybe there is a range of places where people are that we might need to figure out how to engage people at where they are right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really good point, and that's really the question we're asking. And I think what we have this morning in this room is a highly self-selected group of people who've done a lot of reading and thinking about this and have been in discussion. And what we're asking are, what are the other on-ramps that we might provide, knowing that not everyone has the time or appetite for 6 months sign-up for Sacred Ground. So if you have ideas along those lines of what are those shorter on-ramps, easier on-ramps for the other people who are not here this morning, doing what you've done, we're all ears for that.
I'm probably not the best person to speak after what you just said because I don't have a shorter on-ramp to offer, but I wanted to put in a plug for Sacred Ground. I'm in the middle of that right now, and I had done a lot of reading in the past couple of years on this topic and thought I was pretty well educating myself, but it has been eye-opening, and I've learned so much, and it's very well done, and my small group is amazing, and I can't, put in a strong enough plug to do it if you can.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for all the work that you've done. I just wanted to, I'm not sure this is an easier or shorter on-ramp, but I wanted to let you know about a group of us that gathered across the last year from some of the healing ministries. We gathered together with a facilitator that I asked a friend who's done a lot of this anti-racist work, and we read the book, My Grandmother's Hands. And it's about trauma in the body, and it's specifically about trauma in black bodies, white bodies, and police bodies. And I think some education around trauma and around how we store trauma in our bodies and from generation to generation, how we hold that. We can engage in a whole lot of dialogue, kind of words, until we get at the root of what we're storing in our bodies. And that can be from the bodies of generations and generations before us. I think the study that we did, Patty was one of the group members in our group, and we learned a lot. We practiced a lot. It's a lot of experiential learning around breath, around just finding, feeling your feet on the ground, doing some journaling, getting in touch with feelings. For some people, it may feel a little, well, I don't think it's woo-woo, but I happen to feel it's really wonderful. And so I'd love to talk to the two of you and your group a little bit more about what we did. And I think the reason that we chose and selected a small group of healing folks in healing ministries here at St. Columba's was to then think about how we might offer it to the larger community.
Just as far as shorter on-ramps, I mean, one thing is, I don't feel like we should be beating ourselves up for the amount of people that either watched some of the great sessions or the number of people here just because of COVID. And there's so many families that are still disengaged and people that are not coming. And so really these super great programs that we had, just keep repeating them. I don't know, how often people want to go to the same forum, but once, more people are actually in the building or even engaging with this education hour, I mean, this is what, an eighth of the people that normally would come. You've already put in the work to putting together a lot of these things and just getting more eyeballs on them, maybe just to repeat them.
That's a good point.
I was going to say while the mic's making its way back, we are extremely conscious, because you've told us this, that people have a reason to be skeptical about these efforts, which stay in the head, and everybody sits around and has reading groups, and it doesn't move to action. So we're going to move off this question shortly. Let's get this last comment, and then we'll
There's one more back there.
take another step.
Behind.
Okay, this is about action. Is that okay?
That's great.
I'm not a great spokesperson, but I've been feeling very strongly about helping the Moses Cemetery people. Some of you are familiar with this. And I would use the word urgent, but I don't want to load it too much, because through Sacred Ground that I took with Patty and Bill a couple years ago, I've learned that, we white people, man, we've made a mess for ourselves, and we're the ones that have to pull ourselves out of it, and we can't burden the people that we've already burdened for generations with getting us out of the mess that we created. So this meeting came a little bit too fast for me and for my joining the group that is trying to save Moses Cemetery, so I'm sorry I can't put this in a clearer way, but we're almost there. I just learned in a meeting on Friday that they are going to have a show about the Moses Cemetery at the Katzen. I don't know if you knew this, Sandra, but it's really exciting. The show's supposed to last for 3 months over the summer, and they're going to talk about the history of this whole area, and they're very interested in getting helpers. They want to have a speaker series to go all summer, and we should, if any of us are interested in helping with that, that'd be great. But even more important is just saving the cemetery. For residents of Montgomery County, I would urge you to stay abreast of what's going on. Mark Elrich, who is running for re-election, has just decided that he thinks the cemetery land should go back to the Black community, which is a huge success for the group that's trying to save it. But he wasn't specific. What does that mean exactly? When is that going to happen? And will the land really be saved, or saved in perpetuity? So anyway, that's a matter that we could get involved in. I wish I could have, a venue, an avenue right now for inviting people to join, but we will soon.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, right behind you.
This may link both the question on education and action about a point I heard from someone who's recently done a lot of work in this area, and she said change happens at different levels, the individual, the interpersonal, the institutional, and the structural. And change happens at all those dimensions, but some of that action might be less visible if it's more about the personal change and the interpersonal, but it doesn't make it any less meaningful. So I think just offering that as language around the on-ramp question, because many people may still be on the individual change step, and that's okay. It's very powerful. And for those who feel ready to attack institutional and systemic change, that's great. They may have already done the individual and interpersonal work. But that might be a way of linking the notion of where we are in our journey, each of us, and what kind of action each of us is ready to take.
Okay.
How are we doing time-wise?
We have one more, maybe.
We'll do this time.
Here's the big question. Oh, I'm sorry, Simon.
Thank you for letting me know about what's happening with the Moses Cemetery. I know that's a very dynamic and fast-moving issue. It's been in the courts in Maryland and protests and a lot going on. There's also a lot going on elsewhere. The National Park Service has hired a historian that's done a whole research project on the Reno community. His work is now available publicly. There are people who are now involved in trying to create a memorial at Reno, both for the Alice Deal land and for the National Park land. So those are ways in which we can become more involved. We had our mission church, St. George's, on the land where Alice Deal is now located. There's a lot of interest now in trying to sort of reconstruct that history, make people more aware of it. And even though that's sort of a mental process, I can tell you from my own experience, it's transformational. When you go up there and you start to realize that we had parishioners there who were forced from their homes, it just makes a difference. So I think we need to try to engage people in those kinds of activities of remembrance, and to bring people feeling intimately involved in what has happened and what continues to happen here.
Well, I think one of the questions that we have as well in terms of the education is also, what does success look like? So what will it look like when we can say that we are an anti-racist church? And I know as a task force, that's something we have, toyed with. And those of us in our professional lives, also, we always want to measure what we're doing, right? So how do we measure this? I'm sure Ledley has thoughts.
My thoughts are actually, in a way, modest, or at least potentially humble, in that I would put that question, Keisha, in the same framework as, are we a community of people who all pray? Are we a community of people who all give sacrificially? Are we a community of people who are actively finding ways to have our lives cohere with what it is we believe, or to use the let's see if I can pull this off, the prayer that the choristers say, let us confess with our lips what we believe in our hearts, and let us believe in our
heart.
No, how does it go? It ends with believing in our hearts. Anyway, things have to line up. I think I appreciate that we want to, and I want us to push ourselves hard on this and lean into this. I really appreciate what Catherine just offered with the different ways that we might do that. And I think we also have to know that we're all at different places as part of the body, and we're all just continually extending the invitation that this is what Jesus is calling us to be about.
Mm-hmm.
Next steps, we
That
have
might
right
be
at the
it.
time.
Next steps.
Okay, yeah, do it quick.
That was all we got. Oh, wait, whoa. Joshua? Behind you.
Well, I was just thinking along the same lines of there have been so many great social movements in the history of the United States and in the world, and thinking about putting what we're up to here in a context of someone that has done something either directly with anti-racism or just an analogous kind of social movement to address injustice that is similar to our community, whether it be like a nonprofit or, I don't know, a small town or church or synagogue, in which it's an exemplar for us, where the community themselves felt like we had this goal of addressing this injustice that happened either in the history or recently, and we did it. You know, I'm always looking for those type of analogies as something that can inform us, not something that we have to follow blindly, but that can be informative. I don't know one, but like groupthink, it would be great to have something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in that regard, let me just mention, and many of you will know this, the diocese in 2021 formed a cohort of parishes whose task was to look into their own history, much as you heard Bishop Sutton describe churches, parishes in the Diocese of Maryland did. This included about 12 to 14 parishes in the Diocese of Washington. And that study of their history was to lead them to some form of action, reparations, or restoration. There is a second cohort being formed, will begin next month in March. St. Columba's is part of that second cohort. We'll be taking the history that Sandra had so much to do with and working with a group of other parishes across the diocese. And that is a step that takes us from study to action, from study to reparations in some form. And to Joshua's point, it's an opportunity to see what other parishes have done and to find that exemplar.
Okay, what are we going to do right now? We have a couple minutes. What are our next steps? How can you engage? So right now we have 3 active working groups that are actively in place with the task force. Education, ministries, strategy, and communications. As Lane mentioned earlier, these are working in the background, so you might not see us actively engaging on the forefront, but we'll be working with ministries in the background and seeing how we can create on-ramps for people wherever they are, different ways to engage. There's a couple of upcoming activities. So the WIN Citywide Rally for Affordable Housing, March 20th at 3 p.m. I think there's going to be information about that. It's gone out in the e-news. So that's definitely a way to engage. Undesign the Red Line. So that's the exhibit that's currently in Columbia right now. Several of us went to see it, and it is very well done and worth the day trip to Columbia. I think some of us have plans that, if possible, we might be able to bring that a little closer in. It's a really, just to the way that we mentioned earlier, it's just a way of really identifying how choices the government, the structures, the systems makes, positions people for years to come based on that access. And then there's Lenten book groups, hopefully, that are about to start. The Sum of Us with Heather McGee is going to be one of those, so look forward to figuring out how you can engage there. And then we are an open door, so don't feel like you don't know what we're up to. Like, please, just, you can, this is our, we have an email address, so you can email us, but otherwise, like, don't hesitate to, like, reach out to any of us. And then if people are interested and have time and have bandwidth, because that's what some of us do not have, we're more than willing to have people help us out on task force. We've got lots of projects. We need bodies, and we would love to have input. So this is the beginning of hopefully many conversations, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you.